Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis. I am Lord Forwind, here with a brief guide on how to use the estates mechanic. So there are roughly 5 distinct estates in the normal game, and 3 for revolutionary empires that you may or may not see. I'm doing Russia just because they have 4 of them. Most countries in Europe and the rest of the world have 3. Muslims have 4. I'll get into that briefly afterwards. So, your estates, your estates are essentially your different groups of political groups in the country. You have your nobles, you have your merchants, you have your clergy, and in the case of Russia, you have your Cossacks. Now, depending on your form of government, each of them will demand a certain amount of land once you're over a certain size. I don't know the certain development size, but in my opinion, it's like 10 provinces or so. They'll then start to demand it. So in this case, for the boyars and with the Russian government form, they expect to control at least 10% of all your development. In this case, Russia has almost 985 development, which means they want to control quite a bit of your development. They want to have 90 or so. And so in this case, they control the following provinces. This is just the base default setup. So the nobles are red. So they can scatter throughout the world. And their loyalty, the amount of land they want to control will not change based off of their opinion or random events unless you add or take land from them. No, it's dependent on your size and your government form. Certain government forms only have 2 forms of estates. The notable example is the English monarchy. So that helps on that area. I think it's the English monarchy, right? I could be wrong. I know some of the later game forms of government, specifically republics, tend to run into that stuff. Anyhow, the next stuff to remember is their influence. Now, most estates have a base influence. The merchants have a 10%. Cossacks technically have 10% too. But the clergy and the boyars, which are the nobility, and the clergy, which is the same, different names for Muslim nations and others throughout the world, but essentially it's the clergy and the nobility. They start with 20% influence. If an estate goes over 80% influence, they will cause disasters like clergy dominance and other stuff, which you want to avoid at all costs. At that point, you strip land from them to lower their influence, give it back once the modifiers that push them that high go down. But as you can see, there's other stuff that influence them. And in this case, the nobility are also influenced because we're in the Eastern Technology group and because we are a monarchy. If you're a republic, obviously your burghers would want more land and they would have a higher influence, whereas lower influence for the nobility. Clergy tends to stay roughly the same depending on what country you play. It's tough. You kind of have to examine it per each country. But that changes with different events, or if you give the burghers control of centers of trade or trade income stuff, it can vary up and down. And then there's the loyalty level. The loyalty level is the most important one to remember. If it falls below 40, any province that they own will get, I think it's +6 unrest in it, which if you're playing, let's say, as Russia, let's see, do they have an estate? Here we go. So the boyars right now in this state, right now we have -11 unrest. Part of that's due to national defense, but +6 unrest in that province, assuming you're not doing well, could cause quite a bit of disasters and rebellions. And they'll rise up and they'll try and influence your government, force you to make deals. But that fluctuates up and down with different events. Over time, though, it will always return to 50. So even if you're above 50, it'll move down slowly towards 50, and if it's below 50, it'll move up towards 50, which means you've got, on an average, about a 10% plus or minus 50 to interact with the estate on it. For example, if I were to use an interaction, I'll go into this later, but if I was to take a demand military support, you can see the boyars would lose 20% loyalty, or 20 loyalty. So they'd fall to 30 and be rebellious, which would be, now if we were to look at that province again, it's now, well, I have to tab forward a day or two, I suspect. I'm not caring about where I am in the world's history, so There we go. Let's see. They should be unhappy with me now. Controlled by nobility, +5 unrest. That's what it is, +5. So they'll obviously cause some troubles, especially if I have high war exhaustion, etc., etc. But as you can see, it's slowly. Current monthly change is +12%, so it will slowly return to 50 at that rate, which makes it a lot easier to deal with. In terms of interactions, you've got pretty much every estate has a let's lose some prestige or legitimacy and gain 15 loyalty and 10 influence for the estate. That's pretty consistent in all of them. They go by different names, and the clergy one tends to cost legitimacy, and if you're Orthodox, give you patriarch authority. If you're Muslim, moves you towards legalism, etc. It's pretty explanatory there. But then you have other stuff. You can, for the nobility, you can demand a general. I personally have never used this because the huge amount of influence gain tends to mean if you take it, they're getting really close to like 70 or 80% influence. And then, of course, one event can push you over the top. Recruit minister is nice, though. You can usually get a level 2 or level 3 advisor 50% cheaper at the cost of the state gaining 15 influence, which is nice. If you get an event where they lose influence, hiring a minister or something from them will boost it up, but it'll kind of balance out, and you can get a pretty good advisor for relatively cheap. Raise additional levies is probably the best from the nobility estate, other than the demand military support, because it gives you 1 year or so of manpower, which is very strong. Less strong now because now you can slacken recruiting standards, but still matters in this scheme of things. Under the burghers have the most useful state interaction, which is ask for contribution. For 10% of their loyalty, you get, I think it's 1 year of income. And that goes by pretty fast. It's every 10 years. So I recommend if you're at 50 and you don't think you're going to use the burghers' loyalty anytime soon, you ask for contribution constantly. Obviously, you can give them monopoly charters. In case you'll notice, this little modifier you get from having the estate changes based off their influence level. The higher it goes up, the bigger benefits. The lower it goes down, the greater penalties. So in this case, they're very unhappy. But if the loyalty was up, I'd get 15%. If it was above 60, I'd have land maintenance modifiers. So overall, you just kind of want to keep it around 50. Also, the burghers also come with another nice ability, which is you can draft ships for war. This is really important for nations like England, Venice, France, Spain, Portugal, who are going to be wanting a large navy, but navy can be expensive. This will give you usually heavy ships, which are 50 gold apiece, and it'll give them to you free, and they'll build them faster at the cost of loss of loyalty, which is nice. Admiral Ship is the same thing. General Ship for the nobility. Recruit Minister is the same. Demand diplomatics of power is the same. Here's an interaction I like. I like taking ask for contribution, then I give them monopoly charters, then I demand diplomatic support. And yes, they are below 40% in loyalty, so there's going to be rebelliousness, but that's only at 10% a month. That's under 5 years I'll have loyalty back. So it's rather nice, because overall you don't usually give your merchants a lot of land unless you're a republic. So it's fairly safe. Under the clergy have some interesting interactions because they give you stability cost and national tax. And if you've got, you can get admin power from them, generous donations. They have another one where you can pay them money and get loyalty. Sounds really good, but it costs a lot of income. You can do stuff like demand contribution from the burghers and then give it to the clergy to keep them loyal. It's quite nice because then you get essentially free loyalty. And of course there's the admin. You can demand both a minister, which is nice. The unrest is really handy, but the inquisitor tends to be more useful, especially if you're competing with Muslim estates that might be giving you trouble. Let me just check one thing down here. If we give this to them, okay. So if we give province to the clergy and the clergy are above, I think it's 60 loyalty, any province controlled by them will get a +2 missionary strength, which comes in really handy if you give them, for example, Muslim lands, which automatically comes with a -2 conversion strength. So this right here balances out, and then other modifiers will take over and allow you to convert Muslim provinces long before you should have been able to. So that's a kind of handy game interaction mechanic that's lesser known, I would say. Of course, it's difficult in practice because you have to keep moving your estates, but it's doable. Now we'll get into some of the slightly unique estates. You've got the Cossacks, which is the eastern area, which is essentially horsemen that love the steppes. I won't get into their whole history and everything, but you can give them steppe provinces, and they'll give you full manpower and force limits, similar to the nobility, but they'll also give you +1 attrition for enemies, which means, for example, Russia, steppes, if you take defensive ideas, you start to be able to put some very nasty attrition on your enemies, especially if they're wandering through this region, which most AI armies tend to do in the long run, because it's a lot of steppe land. Other than that, they give you cavalry combat ability, which is nice because that's permanently there for the rest of the game. If you boost the loyalty, you'll get more cavalry infantry ratio, and cavalry will be cheaper. They have quite a few different overall modifiers there. I'll boost it all the way up so you can see what the full benefits are. 10% combat ability. Mostly they're used to boost cavalry and to get troops maybe. I don't really use them that much, but I know they're useful. You can get army tradition, get an additional land force limit modifier boost, which is really handy, especially if you're like Russia or even Poland. To get another 20-30 troops towards the end of the game can make a difference. Standard lets raise prestige. They also have raised Cossack hosts. For a loss of loyalty and a gain of influence, you can get free Cossack units, which do we actually have any? That would be a good thing to figure out. I don't think we actually start with any. Usually the game doesn't assign that to you. Let's just give them some land. The Cossack unit, I think it has additional land fire or something, which is quite nice. Let's just give them enough land so I can actually do that. Wait, how much do I even need? Oh, I need a lot of influence. Wow, okay. Tells you how often I actually use these guys. I know they're very useful, I just don't use them. Oh, bother. A lot of the clergy control a lot of this land, which is frustrating. Okay, there's some more. I can give that to them. Will that push us above 40? No. Oh, come on. Just give me the stuff. There we go. So if we do race Cossack host, and we look at them, they have plus 10 shock damage bonus, which can be very useful because you can have a large amount of them given time. So it actually goes really well with the Russian Tsardom, Imperial Princedom's ability to have Streltsy, because those modifiers tend to stack nicely. You can also get a minister for them. You can also get a conquistador, which is nice for Russia because at the start of the game you have all this unexplored land. Of course you can gently and slowly do Siberian frontier across it, but if you wanted to try and invade a country over here faster, that would be useful. So that's really the Cossack estate. Now, a unique estate is the Muslims' fourth estate. I can't actually show it to you, but they have the Domini, and I can show you roughly what it does. It removes local autonomy for tax modifier, makes the province impossible to convert, gives you a tax bonus modifier, and if you have them in your estate as Muslims, you get +1 tolerance of heathens. I think it can actually go up to +0.1, which can give the Muslims a little bit of a way to tolerate like Orthodox Christianity a little bit better, or Catholicism if it comes to it, or Coptic, any of the other heathen religions or heretic religions for them. Sorry, heathen religions. I'm getting it all confused. It goes nicely if you are Muslim and you want to take humanist, because then you're completely tolerant usually of different faiths. But if you're Muslim, it also gives you a tech cost decrease up to 10% depending on the influence. And if you're the Ottomans, it allows you to lock in the estate so you don't accidentally convert them and can raise janissaries. Then there's the Revolutionary Republic estates, but I have actually never ever played a Revolutionary Republic, so I don't actually know those. But I know they're very similar to the nobility, the clergy, and the merchants. Different stuff, more focused on war, stability, trade, but that's the standard thing. Of course, there are factions in terms of like republics, like merchant republics and stuff, but I'm not going to go into all of those. So that's roughly how you use the estates. You tend to give them loyalty and then demand monarch power. If you do it right, like I just did right there, give them loyalty, demand monarch points, you actually tend to come out with them still loyal and a 50 to 100 gain of monarch power. Depending on how high their influence is, you get more power. So you have to keep them happy, which is usually give them a little bit of land. Luckily, if you give the clergy land, let's see, where's the clergy province? Oh, actually, I'll just do boyars. See, boyars remove, if you look down at the bottom there, local autonomy for manpower and force limit. So if you give them high autonomy provinces with lots of military power, base manpower, they will give you the full benefit from it, but you'll lose 25% of the production in tax. For the clergy, it is, let's just give this province the clergy. The clergy remove the tax modifier, and if you give a province to the merchants, they remove the trade, production efficiency, land force, and sailors. So at the cost of having a province with 25 autonomy in at least 2 categories, trade or diplo or military, you get the full benefits of the other. For example, if you were to find a province like, here's a good example, Moscow, if for example it wasn't our capital, and we massively boosted the admin power, so it was like 20 admin and then very low production and manpower, it would be worth giving it to the clergy because we'll get the full benefit from the admin power, but we'd not get a big a penalty for production and manpower. It's a bit confusing, and overall you tend to lose out a little bit, but it's a pretty complex system of juggling loyalty at this rate that you get about 100 monarch power from demanding stuff from them, while at the same time keeping them loyal enough they don't rebel on you. So it's a very fun mechanic, and hopefully this guide has helped you a little bit understand the estates. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I will try and help you with them. Bye for now.